In this episode, we break down who makes sense for the Packers in free agency, considering things like age, projected contract, and fit on the team. Tune in to find out.
Yeah, I've been wanting this shit forever. I've been in the field with whatever they throw at me. Brush it off, pick myself up, moving on to the better. Okay. Hey. Yeah. Ain't no errors, baby. It's a new era. I wake up early feeling rich like I'm Kesha.
All right, everybody. Welcome back into another episode of Sounds Gouda. My name is Jordan Olson, and my other co-host and best friend over here is Rob Ralph. We are, as always, excited to be here with you talking Packers football. Today, we are talking free agency, and if you like what we're doing, you can catch more of what we put out on Wednesdays and Saturdays on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So before we jump into talking about which free agents we think are fits for the Packers based on all of the things we hit in our intro, age, contract, and fit on the team, I just want to run over some other important free agency dates and offseason timelines, talk a little bit about the cap spike and what will that mean. So some important dates. So some of these have already passed by the time you'll listen to this, but February 18th was the first day to designate franchise and transition tags. Probably won't be a lot of traction on that until you actually hit a little bit closer to that March 4th deadline of when those franchise and transition tags are actually due. But obviously, as some of those players are retained or franchise tagged by their organization, it may take a few of these players right off this list. You know, coming up this weekend, we've got the scouting combine in Indianapolis, so maybe as teams really fall in love with certain position groups, and we'll maybe be talking a little bit about this as we go along, maybe they decide they don't want to dabble in the free agent pool in some of those groups because they really like the players that are going to be available to them in the NFL draft. But the big date to remember with free agency is that on March 10th, the legal negotiating period begins for unrestricted free agents. And that's the date that you're going to see a lot of the big headlines for these top end guys and all the big contract numbers are going to be put out. And that will continue until March 12th when they can actually go ahead and sign those deals, make it official. And then the teams put a lot of their news out there reporting those contracts and whatnot. Lots of Packers news coming in the next few weeks here. And just to note, we did get a cap spike. All of the people that have been paying attention know that the cap is going up 9.4%, approximately somewhere between 9 and 10%, which is approximately a $24 million increase. So last year, the cap was at $255.4 million, and it's projected to go up somewhere around $279 million this year. So we don't know exactly how that totally affects the Packers' spending number, but there is going to be a little bit more money to spend. Rob, I'm going to throw it to you, though. Like, we were talking about this a little bit in our pre-pod, but what does that cap spike mean for the landscape of the NFL and free agency? Have any thoughts about that?
Well, some players you think for sure that would hit free agency that there wasn't a chance for them to be re-signed by their team, that's going to be changing a little bit. You know, we alluded to it a little bit as well before we hopped on this, but like Max Crosby, you know, you just got a Pete Carroll right in there, right? For a head coach, depends on who you get in there for a quarterback too. Aaron Rodgers, I don't know. Las Vegas is always pretty intriguing, at least to me. And that could completely change somebody like Max Crosby's mind too as well. Or, you know, insert any other one there too that, you know, you might feel like just might be a little bit too much, but now you're able to fit them in with this cap increase too as well. So there's going to be a lot of different conversations being had by teams on who maybe initially they probably were going to let them test the market that they can, you know, fit back into their team cap and budget.
Yeah, and one other thing is, like, I wonder how this is going to potentially drive up the prices now that teams have a little bit more money to spend. They're probably a little bit more comfortable getting into a bidding war for some of the players that they're highly interested in, right? So T. Higgins, we'll talk about him later, but for example, if he's got
$40 million.
He's going to go somewhere between 25 and 30 million. I would expect it to be a lot closer to 30 million average annual value than 25, but now does that number become 32 million or 33 million annually because of the extra money that there is to spend?
Yes, probably.
For the desperate teams, they will spend and drive up the money. And that's one thing we know about the Packers is they typically set their number. And if it's agreeable by that prospective free agent or their own players that they're trying to retain, then they become Green Bay Packers. But if that number exceeds the Packers threshold for this is as much as we're willing to spend, you end up seeing them become a Minnesota Viking or somebody else at that point in time. So there's both positives and benefits to how the Packers conduct their business with spending money on players. I'm for it mostly because that means that we're competitive year after year and we don't end up like the New Orleans Saints and some of those other teams that are in salary cap hell at the moment. Let's jump into, we're going to talk about free agents by position. This list was generated off of PFF's top 100 free agents available. Yes, we know there are other guys, but these are a lot of the biggest fish and people who could make Xavier McKinney or Josh Jacobs types of impact. Not all of them are at that level, but players that can come in and be starters and make substantial impacts on this roster. So, and we are primarily going to be covering the 6 positions of need that we've already identified in the past: center, edge, corner, linebacker, defensive tackle, cornerback. I think that's all. A wide receiver. Obviously. Wide receiver is a big one in the conversation. So, Rob, where do you want to start? And we're going to give you a few names. We're not going to give you everybody on that list, but who makes sense for the Green Bay Packers?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before, but I'll start at the center position. Obviously, some options. Josh Myers, you can re-sign him. We know what Josh Myers provides and what value that he provides to the Green Bay Packers and what he does not. Tristan Colin Castillo from the Cardinals. He'll be 27 years old, so he's another option down here as well. And then it gets pretty dire. And I'd even say that Tristan Colin Castillo is pretty much at that point as well too. So to us and to Jordan and I specifically, we had 2 options, resign Josh Myers or get Drew Dahlman and or draft, a prospect as well, considering how their board falls and whatnot too. And, there's other options as well. Jacob Monk as well. There's other positional versatility for the Packers, like Elton Jenkins and Sean Ryan, who's played center. But for this, we really feel like Drew Dahlman could come in, just 26 years old, has an overall PFF grade of 78.8. His pass blocking grade for 24 was 66.6. That's not as good, but like we've alluded to from before, that is the Green Bay offensive line coaching strengths, is to be able to teach up their offensive linemen to be good pass protectors. And then, like we've, again, talked about in other pods, his run block grade is absolutely phenomenal. It's almost a 30-point jump from what Josh Myers is. So I really think that Drew Dahlman can come in and make a significant impact for the Green Bay Packers this year.
Yeah, just a little bit. We'll keep it short, but you do have to consider the type of running team and blocking scheme the Packers use. A little deeper dive is that Drew Dahlman is really good in the zone blocking scheme, and I know the Packers are using a little bit more gap and some other things with Josh Jacobs. However, he has shown proficiency in all types of those running games before, so I don't know that it would make a difference in how, if we did sign Drew Dahlman, how we'd deploy the running game, if we would start to go back to a little bit more zone, which prior to Josh Jacobs, we were running a lot of zone, but we had more success in our running game last year, starting to use some gap and some other things. So I think Drew Dahlman's a fit. I think the Packers can improve his pass blocking grades and would be a big boon in the run game. So we'll see. Outside of that, there's obviously, just an offensive line in general, there's some other tackles and some other things out there that we could sign, but I'm not really interested in spending big money on mediocre tackles or whatever when we have an outstanding option in-house with, obviously Zach Tom is becoming a stalwart at right tackle, but at left tackle, we feel good about where Rasheed Walker's at, and I'm not wanting to spend big money at left tackle or one of the tackle positions this offseason. So let's stay on the offensive side of the ball, and let's talk about one of the hottest positions for discussion by the Packers fan base and media this offseason. But wide receiver, who makes sense and who doesn't? Is there anybody from this group that does? We're going to throw out T. Higgins out of this conversation, really, because I don't think the Packers are going to spend $32 million on a receiver. And yes, he is the crown jewel of this free agency class, but is he a true number one, like top 10 guy. I'm not sure that he's quite in that criteria. And if I'm the Green Bay Packers, I'm not paying $32 million a year for like the guy that's like the 15th best receiver in the NFL. It would improve our receiving room without a doubt, but I think we can spend our money a little more wisely there. So looking at some other guys on this list, number of guys I'm going to throw out for a number of reasons. Amari Cooper had a terrible season last year. He's also on the wrong side of 30. So even though he is a big name, I am not interested in Amari Cooper and his 8 drops that he had last season. A very un-Amari Cooper-like season. Couple other older players that I'm going to throw out because even though they could make an impact in 1 year, I just don't think that they fit the timeline for this team or they substantially improve our receiving room. Stephon Diggs and DeAndre Hopkins are out. They both graded out very similarly to what the Packers receiving core has already in Romeo Doubs and Jaden Reed. And I think we're just really adding another player of that caliber to that group that's an external guy. A couple other guys that are no's for me. Darius Slayton has speed. We've talked about a need for speed, but he can't catch the ball. He's out. Keenan Allen's getting older than dirt. He had drop problems last year. Brandon Cooks is another speed option that's on the wrong side of 30 and statistically didn't have a great year, right? So who's left for discussion there? Primarily the biggest person that I want to discuss and think is an outstanding fit for the Packers is Chris Godwin. And why am I so interested in Chris Godwin? And you might say, Jordan, he just had a devastating ankle injury that ended his season. That's true. But if he checks out with the Packers staff and the medical team, I think Chris Godwin could be everything that we're looking for if we're going to go the free agent route for a wide receiver. So he had an 86.3 overall grade last year. So I think he played about 6 or 8 games overall. So he did have a pretty decent sample size and was on his way to a fantastic season. A 0.7 grade overall in receiving. When targeted, had 127.5 passer rating when targeted. So what does he excel at? He excels at the medium, short, intermediate passing game. So he had PFF grades of over 90 in each of those categories. And here's one even better, is that he had 0 drops last season, and throughout his career, he has less than 6% of the balls thrown to him that have resulted in drops. So what have been our big bugaboos is that the Packers receivers need to get past the sticks, hold on to the ball, and I think Chris Godwin could do that for us. A couple other things why he's a fit. Packers value their high athletic receivers and also the size and weight. So he's a 6'1", 208 guy that ran a 4.4 40 and has a 9.67 RAS. So he is traditionally what the Packers look for at the wide receiver position in terms of his measurables. What's he going to cost? Probably about 3 years, $60 million. And I've seen probably about $40 million of that being guaranteed. Seems like a decent amount of money for a player who's coming off of an injury. But, you know, if it's really a 2-year contract at $40 million guaranteed, we could move on from him. And I think the window to win is in this next 2 seasons, 25 and 26. So Chris Godwin makes a tremendous amount of sense for me. So you have anything to add to that, Rob?
Yeah, no, you hit it spot on too. And the 0 drops is what is the most intriguing. And I think a lot of people too will be like, well, what about Devontae Adams? And this is a crazy stat that Jordan was able to pull out for this. But guess how many drops he had from last year? 10 drops.
Mm-hmm.
So in the double digits, which you're like, well, that's not really like Devontae Adams. Totally true. Could be an outlier type of year as well. But he'd be a little bit more expensive as well, too. I can still see it, right? Like, Devontae Adams will always honestly be, a Green Bay Packer, so I wouldn't hate the move. But I just think for what it is, what the value we could get it, and how good of a wide receiver, if healthy, Chris Godwin is, he could come in and make a really good impact with this wide receiver.
Yep. And, he's not in that top 10 group either, but the contract is much more appropriate. I'm much more comfortable paying $20 million to a guy who dramatically improves our room than $32 million a season to a guy who dramatically improves our room, but isn't a top 10 guy. So keep an eye out for Chris Godwin and the Packers being interested in him as a free agent target. If not him, I'm really out on almost every other free agent wide receiver of note, and I'd rather us draft a high draft pick in the first, second, or third round and add to the room that way. And I think Rob's in agreement with that. So let's move over to the defense, and Rob, pick your flavor at which position you'd like to start with.
Yeah, one that I had teed up here too, but a linebacker as a back end need for the Packers. Not really I'd consider in the top echelon, but obviously depending on what happens with Isaiah McDuffie and Eric Wilson. But so some numbers here too. Zach Bond from the Eagles, he's probably going to get top of the market dollar. Obviously he just won the Super Bowl, so he would be obviously a phenomenal fit for the Packers, but he's going to be a little bit too much, and honestly I don't see the Eagles letting him go. Nick Bolton from the Chiefs is another intriguing option. He's a really good player, obviously, for the Chiefs for the last how many ever years, but he's another option here too, for 4 years, possibly $12.3 million annual average. Another surprising option down here too that you think that would have played out his time in the league, but he's still living and breathing. Bobby Wagner from the Commanders has some surprising metrics down here that I was like, I didn't even think that was real when Jordan was putting this in, but he could be a sneaky one for the Packers at about a year and almost about $7 million. But just real quickly, 89.9 overall PFF grade, 90.1 pass rush, 90.8 run defense, 68.1 on the pass defense, 3 sacks and 49 stops. And has played in a 4-3, so I don't mind that too as well. He is going to be he's 34 and a half, so he's definitely getting up there in age, but obviously he's proving here in the metrics that he's able to still be able to compete at a high level. Ernest Jones from the Seahawks, he's 25. He's a potential option, and then Tyrell Dotson from the Dolphins, he's 26 and a half. He'll almost be 27. Is another option. But the one I think that I like the best specifically for me, and if his injury is 100% healed, and he is better, so that's a big if, but Dre Greenlaw from the San Francisco 49ers, he only played 34 snaps from this last year. He did have a bad Achilles injury that basically set him out all of this last year, and they shut him down, but you're going to get him at really good value, a 1 year, possibly $6.5 million contract for him. 82 overall PFF grade, 85 run defense, 83.5 in the pass defense. Obviously played in the San Francisco 4-3. If he can come in and he is healthy, he is absolutely excellent, and he excels in coverage, which you wouldn't think so, but having earned a PFF coverage grade of 82.6 and 79.5 over the previous 2 seasons. I think he brings value. I think he is elite when he's healthy and he's on the field. So assuming that is that for the Packers, I just don't. To me, this feels like a no-brainer. But again, too, they're going to do their due diligence as far as to see if he's healthy or not. I think you'd come in and even if he's only at 75% of what he was or 80%, let's just say him and Quay Walker and Edgerrin Cooper, could you imagine? I think it would be an excellent combo and at great value for the Packers.
Yeah, I mean, it would hands down be one of the best, if not the best linebacker room in the NFL if Dre Greenlaw is healthy. And I love that fit. My biggest question is, and this isn't really part of our exercise, but if he is healthy, the 49ers staff is probably going to know that. And for that amount of money, I don't know why the 49ers would let him walk out of the building, because he is one of the top 3 or 4 linebackers in this league, and we know they're hard to come by. You don't draft an Edgerrin Cooper every year, and Dre Greenlaw is one of those guys that's in that category. If the Niners let him get away, and if he is healthy for that value, he would be a tremendous fit and asset to this defense. And obviously, plays in a 4-3, similar types of concepts to what Jeff Hafley's maybe running in our defense. That'd be awesome. So linebacker in general, between, if we could afford a Zach Bond, if we like what Nick Bolton has showed us in terms of his championship medal. Nick Bolton has, a lot of missed tackles, but Nick Bolton's been a big high impact player for the Chiefs over the last 4 years. So this is one position where for not as much money as like for the wide receiver position example, if we added one of these players, we could have maybe the strongest linebacker group in the NFL. And we already have maybe one of the top safety groups. We could really start stacking our defense with top groups by position.
Yeah.
Now we're really in a good place, right? So I kind of think in free agency or the draft in general, we obviously have to fill holes and needs. But if we have an opportunity to create the best room at that position, and now we start to have multiple of those on one side of the ball, we are creating an elite unit at that point in time. So
yeah, and our defense was already starting to click from last year. Man, then you have stars at all three levels of that defense, like we've alluded to. Makes Rob pretty happy. You know, I like to be on that defensive train.
Yeah, so let's jump into the defensive tackle room. I actually think that in looking at this list of players, there's maybe only one that makes sense. If you've been listening to Andy Herman, you probably already kind of agree with this thought process. So maybe not anything new, but Levi Oruza, and that's a hard one to pronounce, and I definitely butchered it. But from the Detroit Lions, divisional rival Detroit Lions, he's about to be 27 years old, but compared to his peers for his production, he's projected at a much lower contract number, and we'll see if that comes to be true. Maybe just like Spot Track and PFF have some like weird analytics, and that number is going to be a lot closer to these other guys. But right now, he's projected at a 2-year, $9 million, $10 million contract. So we're talking in that $4.5 or $5 million average annual value. With this year's defensive tackle group being so deep in the draft, probably the deepest it's been in over a decade and loaded with talent, I'm personally not interested in spending big money dollars at the defensive tackle position unless we're getting the next Aaron Donald, right? So, Levi Oruzarike makes sense. He's got about a 70 overall PFF grade, 69.4, 67.1 pass rush, and a 64.1 run D. So, where does that compare to TJ Slayton? Rob and I had this discussion a little bit earlier, but we're confused because PFF has TJ Slayton rated as a 45.0 against the run, which is amongst the lowest by any defensive tackle. ESPN has TJ Slayton rated number 1 on their list in defensive tackles run stop win rate. So we're seeing very different metrics. I know there's been a lot of conversation about him being an outstanding run defender, but I think Levi Oruzarike really brings a lot additional in the pass rush, and I think that would be where the benefit, and that's been one of the biggest Packers bugaboos, is we don't want to lose the defensive run stopping that we found last year that was great for the first time in forever, but we need a little bit more push from that front four, right? And I think that's where, for the money, Levi Onwuzurike could bring us some value. The other guys on this list, Osa Odigozua from the Cowboys, definitely butcher that one too, but he's projected at 3 years, $63 million. And to pair another defensive tackle that we're paying over $20 million with Kenny Clark, which is already making a giant contract, investing those kind of resources don't really make sense to me. I know that coming out of the Eagles Super Bowl, everybody's talking about strengthening both the offensive and defensive line, but I think we can do it in this draft. Milton Williams is another player, obviously an Eagle. He's going to go in that same ballpark, 3 years, $60 million, 3 year, $55 million. So again, outstanding pass rusher, has over a 90 grade from PFF in pass rush, but you better really value that if you're going to pay him that kind of contract. BJ Hill's almost 30 from the Bengals, and he doesn't really bring us any additional value for his money, although he is significantly cheaper than those other guys we talked about half the price. But I don't think that he substantially improves the unit for about the $9 or $10 million annually that you're spending. So, I don't know, do you have any other notes on the defensive tackles, Rob?
I mean, just to me, I'd bring back TJ Slayton on a very, very cheap contract. I think just from the eyeball test too, like we could just tell like TJ Slayton, especially like towards the back half of the year, was really doing quite well as far as his run defense goes. So I would probably argue more on the ESPN side of metrics as far as that goes, specifically on this. And I'd be curious to know exactly what goes into just in general, all the grading and stuff that they do for PFF. And maybe we can touch on that here at some point. But you're right. I mean, the defensive tackle group from 2025, this year's class is phenomenal. So I'd much rather get back a TJ Slayton on a very cheap contract and then be able to draft one, if not two or more.
If we get through the combine, this coming week and that number is really that deep, then let's go ahead. Let's take one in the first round, the second round. Let's take one in the fourth. And if we move on from Kenny Clark after this year, we have our defensive tackles of the future. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about corner, one of our biggest positions of need. So who makes sense for you, Rob, in that cornerback group?
Yeah, there's a lot of options here, as well. So I'll just go through, some of those, but DJ Reed, he's going to probably get top of the market type of, value. He's 28 years old, pretty solid year, 70.7 overall, 70.1, coverage, 0 interceptions from last year, a little bit surprising, but 91.7 passer rating. Chardavius Ward from the San Francisco 49ers, he's obviously getting up there in age as well. Not quite as good of metrics, so his contract is not going to be as good, but 56.2 overall, 58.2 cover, and then also 2 with 0 interceptions. Rasul Douglas is another one, right? The famed Green Bay Packer that we let go, but 3 years, around $35 million for a contract. 1.9 annual average, but 59.2 overall, 58.9 for coverage. Carlton Davis is somebody that makes a little bit of sense for the Packers. He was with the Detroit Lions. He's 28 years old. Overall 74.5, grade 72.1 for coverage, 2 interceptions and 6 pass breakups. He's somebody that I think that could come in and make a difference. 13.8 annual average value too for the contract at about a 3 years for $41 million for him. I think that would make some sense. We had some conversations down here too as well, but Byron Murphy Jr., right? He's gonna get probably top of the dollar too for his market. His projection is 4 years, $88 million at 22.1 annual average. So, as we were talking about from before, but with that cap number going up too for teams, maybe that's something that the Vikings obviously will probably be looking into, because pretty solid year, 70, almost a 73 overall, almost a 73 cover grade, 6 interceptions, 5 pass breakups for him for the year. So he's somebody that's probably going to get a very good contract as well. Some older players that I don't think really make sense, for the Packers, and Jordan, you can come in here too, because there's definitely a lot of options here. But Mike Hilton from the Bengals, almost 31 years old. Pretty solid year, 75.9 overall, 68.5 in coverage, 1 interception and 2 pass breakups. Stephon Gilmore, 35, another ageless wonder. But 1 year, around $5.5 million. He only had a 63-point overall grade, 60.4 coverage, only 1 interception. So I don't know if the Packers realistically will go this way. And then something me and you have touched on from before that we think is probably the most ideal situation for the Packers, and that's getting Paulson Adebo from the Saints. 2 years, $22 million, 11.1 annual average. He makes sense as far as contract and money goes, and the cap for the Packers. He had a 63.3 overall, 63.9 cover, 3 interceptions and 7 pass breakups, so was still able to bring a lot of those ball skills. And he's somebody that you could get at really good value for the Packers. So if we're gonna go that route and get a cornerback, I think Paulson Adebo to me makes the most sense.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think I look at this list, consider everything you've talked about. One other younger guy that I like, that I know the Packers had a lot of intrigue in, and I know he hasn't had the most outstanding statistics in his young career, is Asante Samuel Jr. I really like him if we were to get him at the right value, considering he's only 25 years old. But I don't know, right now he's projected 4 years, $45 million. I don't know that I want to pay him $12, $13, $14, $15 million a year, but we'll really see where the cornerback market settles. 100% agree that Paulson Adebo for that money is my number one target. If the Packers did want to pay a little bit more money and they were able to get a Carlton Davis the third, on a little bit of the cheaper end of the projection, that $13 million, I think he would make a lot of sense for me in this group. And when he was out there on the field for the Lions, you could see the impact that he made. And as we've talked about, we don't know really like how a lot of these first round corners are going to maybe fit or project to the Packers. Maybe by the time they pick again in the late second round, a couple of those guys they like are gone. They may really need to insulate themselves in free agency with one of these players. Yeah, I don't know that I like Byron Murphy getting the, $22-24 million a year and basically getting the savings from cutting or trading Ja and replacing that with a 27-year-old Byron Murphy that now you have to pay and have on contract for 4 full years, already becoming injury riddled at the age of 27, 28, and now we got to pay a guy nearly at the same rate to go through age 31, 32. So the other thing with Byron Murphy is like he finally had his big breakout year last year, so he's going to get paid on what 2024 looked like some other players will, but not necessarily being consistent for his entirety of his career so far. Last group we're going to talk about is we are going to talk about edge, and there are some interesting guys in here. Guys that don't make sense to me right now. Hassan Reddick, he's going to be 30 and has been a bit of a big distraction. The Jets traded for him and he held out, so I'm out on him. We don't need any distraction divas on this team. Daria Gumawali from the Colts. I like his age, but I'm not sure for the money that he's going to get that he's going to be a big impact type of player that we want. Malcolm Koonce is a guy that's on this list that's rated pretty high, but seemingly out of nowhere, he's going to get 2 years, $40 million. And, I think he hardly played last year. He didn't have enough PFF data to get any statistics. Plus, I probably see him as a guy that highly benefits from Max Crosby's production and presence on the other sides.
Yeah.
A couple guys that maybe do make sense that we want to talk about: Josh Sweat, Khalil Mack, and Chase Young. So I'll start with Chase Young. Chase Young's another guy that's probably going to get a pretty sizable paycheck based on what he did in 2024.
I feel like every year we are having this conversation, everybody is, for Chase Young for the league, right?
Chase Young, though, last year the difference was they brought him in on like a 1-year deal, right? It was like 1 year, $10 million. Like that seemed like a good gamble. If he's now going to get 4 years, $70 million, so, $17 or $18 million a year, that's a pretty sizable investment. He was a great fit with the Saints. He did have 7 sacks and 66 pressures on 740 snaps, so he's healthy, he's available. He's obviously a physical freak. If you could get him on the cheaper side, maybe like $15 million average annual value, and you didn't have to commit to 4 years, maybe you could get him to sign a 3-year contract. He's still only 25, going to be 26 years old this upcoming season.
Oh, still very young.
Seems like he's been in the league for like 10 years, but it hasn't been that long. There is familiarity with Jeff Hafley, though. He did play with him at Ohio State. He is a former first-round pick. There's a lot of connections that could make this make sense if the contract was right.
And I'll say that his 1 year with Hafley, and I don't know if this is just the outlier or whatever, but that was his best year and what made him one of the top picks that year.
So talking about Josh Sweat, he's going to be 28 years old. He's going to get a contract very similarly, 3 years, $18 million average annual value. So like 3 years, 56, 3 years, $60 million. Actually, that was a projection too that was largely based on pre-Super Bowl performance. I think the 2.5 sacks that he had in the Super Bowl, teams are going to see that, and that price is going to go up. I think you're definitely looking at 3 years, $64 million for Josh Sweat. And that's a lot of money to invest in a 28-year-old. And overall, he was average against the run. He had about a 69.3 run grade and had a 70.1 pass rush, or 71.5 pass rush grade. So he did have 8 sacks and 54 pressures. I like the potential of what Josh Sweat can do across from Rashawn Gary. It's just, it's like with the Chris Godwin conversation. We probably can only afford one Chris Godwin or one Josh Sweat at the $20 million AAV mark. So pick your poison. What do we want to address? And then a little bit more on a discount, but we are getting a discount on a player who has been, an all-pro, a Pro Bowler, somebody who's going to potentially be and probably will be a Hall of Famer in Khalil Mack. He's 34 years old. I know that a lot of Packers podcasters have done specials on Khalil Mack and what he could bring to this team. Initially, I was very out on this idea. And I'm still very out on this idea. If you have to sign him to a 3 or 4 year deal, him and his agent are probably going to be looking to maximize the end of his career here. And at 34 years old, I'm not willing to give him a 4-year deal. But if you could sign Khalil Mack on a 2-year, $40 million deal, he's still an exceptional player at this point in time. A 90.4 overall grade, nearly an 80% or 80 grade on his pass rush according to PFF. And outstanding against the run, 88.0 grade against the run according to PFF. So still, even at his age, a player that could bring a lot across from Rashawn Gary at this point in time. So I don't know. What are your final thoughts on edge? Which one of those guys do you like best as a fit?
Well, I like Myles Garrett or Max Crosby the best, but at the cost of what it would be, yeah. Khalil Mack, it's in his numbers. He's had a very good resurgence here. It does remind me kind of like when Von Miller got his contract back in 2022 for the Buffalo Bills. Granted, that was a 6-year, $120 million contract, or like it was more of like a 3-year, $52.5 million contract in reality. But he's had a resurgence here the last couple of years. Last year, obviously a 90.2 overall. So, if you could get him on a 2-year, 19 to 20, 18, possibly, I think that's what he's going for. It's calculated him going 22.5 million average right now, but he's had it here the last couple of years. So I think that this is something that would make sense if the Packers wanted to go this route, and hope that he wouldn't decline.
So my last free agent question for you, Rob, and then we'll close out the show. So let's just say that the Packers are only going to make one $20 million splash this offseason. They probably will make a couple other investments, at the 10, 12, $13 million range. But if they were going to spend $20 million annually on one of these players, who is that for you, and how does that improve the team the most? And I know I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yeah, T. Higgins, I love the idea of T. Higgins, but he's gonna be way too much, way too much. So that one's out. Paulson Adebo, but he's not gonna be a $20 million dollar type of guy. We really like. Drew Dahlman is obviously another one. So I get a couple of those. Ideally, I think like a Drew Dahlman, honestly. That would improve our center position. How important that is just, from the Philadelphia Eagles alone winning the Super Bowl. But building up the trenches, I think, is extremely important, and getting better as far as your run blocking goes for your center position. And Drew Dahlman would bring that. So I love the idea of him. I love the idea of Paulson Adebo as well, too, to shore up our cornerback position. Defensive tackle, like I alluded to, whether you feel like there's 24 prospects first round or whatever, or you feel like there's 5 or 10 or whatever, subjectively. I love going the draft route as far as that goes. So it's kind of a cop-out answer, but I do like Drew Dahlman and Paulson Adebo the most, and then building the rest of it through the draft.
So what I hear in your answer is that Rob doesn't want to spend $20 million on any of these players, and he'd rather, which
yeah,
I am almost 100% in agreement that we probably would be better served to invest in 2 or 3 players that would improve us and be the best at their position. Like, yes, our biggest needs are corner and pass rush, and I'm to a little less of an extent wide receiver. But if we spent $12 or $13 million on a year to get a center in Drew Dahlman, or $12 million a year, $13 million a year to get Zach Bond, now we continue to have one of the top 3 or 4 offensive lines in the NFL. We continue, or maybe not continue, but for the first time in a long time, maybe have the top linebacker room in the NFL, and we just figure the rest out from there. So
Dre Greenlaw, if the 49ers are crazy enough to let him go, if he's healthy. That's the other one. Yeah,
I think he would be a hot pick. If I play the game of the exercise that I asked, if I had to spend $20 million on a player that would most improve the team this year, I didn't think I would think this before I did all this research, but I think Chris Godwin is my answer. And I know I lobbied for him quite a bit earlier in the show.
That's a good one.
But I think he is that bucket getter, that guy on your offense that's a veteran that comes in, that's won a Super Bowl. He played with Tom Brady. He seems like, Tom Brady called us out about being in our details. He seems like with his route running, his attention to detail, the fact that he has no drops, that he's a guy that could bring that value to that offense, be a security blanket for Jordan Love. And we figure the rest out by maybe adding a Paulson Adebo and drafting heavily defensively after that point.
Which has been the Packers' memo for the last how many years?
Hopefully with Hafley's influence, we find a few more guys that click. So, well, folks, it's been a long episode here for us, but we've covered a lot of free agent options, and I hope you enjoyed listening to us. So, Rob, why don't you go ahead and close out the show?
Yeah, we appreciate everybody coming back and taking a listen to us. As always, let us know how you feel about what we talked about. Maybe we missed somebody, or maybe we hit on somebody that you really like, or maybe you had a different plan. Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to engage with you all, no matter what feelings you have on the Packers. So we do have new content every Wednesday, Saturday on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So please make sure to give us a like, sub, and follow us on those platforms, please. We genuinely appreciate it. And Jordan and I are both trying to get to 500 subs and 3,000 public watch hours. So if you know anybody that you would like to nerd out as much as we do with the Packers, we would genuinely appreciate you sending them our way. Just know that we are on social too as well. I am at Sounds Gouda with 3 A's, and Jordan is at Owlson Jord. And as always, Packers fans, that's all we got for you today. So we hope that you have a Gouda morning, a Gouda afternoon, and a Gouda night. Take care. Go Pack Go.
Been wanting this shit forever. I've been in the field with whatever they throw at me. Brush it off, pick myself up, moving on to the better. Okay. Hey.